How's it going, guys? Mr. Huff here. We're going to get started on this next lesson talking about legislative powers. Now, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution lists Congress's specific or expressed powers. These are also called delegated powers. Clause 18 is going to give Congress implied powers to do whatever is necessary and proper to carry out the expressed powers. This is often called the elastic clause because it allows Congress to stretch its powers to meet the needs. Now, Congress is also going to be given powers. Let's see, which way am I? Congress is going to be given powers to, powers over money. So they're going to have money powers. The expressed power, the power specifically given to them, is to collect taxes for defense and welfare, to borrow money, to establish bankruptcy laws, to coin and print, regulate money, and to punish counterfeiters. The implied powers, those powers that are given so that they can meet the express powers, those elastic powers, is to collect taxes for schools, welfare, and housing, and also to maintain a Federal Reserve Board. Congress is also given the power over commerce. They're going to have these commerce powers. The express power, the power specifically given to them, is to regulate foreign and interstate commerce. The implied power is going to be prohibit discrimination in restaurants, hotels, and other public places. Now, the Commerce Clause, there's been much debate over that. Loose constructionalists interpret it as that it expands the powers of the federal government. However, strict constructionalists are going to interpret it narrowly, that it narrows the powers of the federal government, meaning it kind of just, it makes it really, really hard for Congress to use those types of powers. Other types of powers over here is going to be military and foreign policy powers. Those powers specifically given to Congress is going to be declare war, raise and support and regulate an army, a national guard, and to punish acts committed on international waters and against laws of other nations. The implied powers for those express powers is going to be the right to draft into armed services. Some other legislative powers might include establishing laws of naturalization, establish post offices and roads, grant copyrights and patents, create lower federal courts, govern Washington, D.C., and those laws that are necessary and proper. Those implied powers, that's going to include the power to limit the number of immigrants into the United States. So if Congress is given the expressed power to establish laws of naturalization, the implied power would be to limit the number of immigrants into the United States. Now, Congress has the power to collect taxes or revenue, so whenever you hear taxes, you might also hear revenue. Know that they're one and the same. Taxes, revenue, they're the same thing. And they use those to pay for government and its services. All tax bills are going to start in the House of Representatives. So any bill, any legislation that has to do with taxes, it's going to start in the House of Representatives. And if it gets through the House, it has to be approved by the Senate. Spending taxpayers' money is a two-step process. The bill has to be authorized so that it creates and sets an amount that's going to be spent. And also, there are appropriation bills. These are actually going to provide the money for each program. So we have authorization bills and we have appropriation bills. Authorization bills are going to create projects, and they're going to set the amount of money. Appropriation bills are going to be those bills that provide the money for each of the programs. Now, the Constitution is going to give Congress the power to regulate foreign and interstate commerce. Laws dealing with air traffic, television, and air pollution are all based on the Commerce Clause. Only Congress can declare war. Now, there's going to be this thing we're talking about later once we get to the executive branch, where the president can send troops into a certain area for a certain amount of time. But don't worry about that now. We're going to get into that later. Congress has the power to create and maintain and also oversee the Army and the Navy. Now, Congress can also propose constitutional amendments, and we're gonna get into the amendments also, all 27 of them. You're gonna have to know those just for an FYI. Now, Congress counts electoral votes in presidential elections. If no one receives a majority, that magic number of 270, the House is going to pick the president and the Senate is going to pick the vice president. Now, we talked about checks and balances and separation of powers in the last unit. Now, with the legislature, the Senate, they can approve or reject a president's nomination of federal judges and ambassadors. So this is one way that the Senate is going to check the powers of the executive branch. The Senate must also approve all presidential treaties. Now, when it comes to the House of Representatives, we talked a little bit about impeachment. The House is going to decide whether or not to charge an official of a crime. The Senate is going to vote to remove them from office or to keep them in office. However, if they're going to remove them from office, they need a 2/3 majority vote. They have to get at least 2/3 of the Senate to vote to do that. Now, Congress is also going to oversee government activities. They're going to review actions of the executive branch. The majority of the subpoena power to call members of the executive branch before Congress to testify, that's going to be one of those powers that Congress has. Failure to appear whenever Congress calls you in for subpoena, you'll be held in contempt. Congress providing oversight of the executive branch is one of the most important functions of Congress. Sometimes there's going to be special investigations which may lead to criminal charges or even new laws, for instance, steroids in baseball. Now, Congress is also going to have limits. Congress cannot violate the Bill of Rights. Article 1, Section 9, it's going to limit the congressional powers in our great Constitution, pocket Constitution on deck right here. If you have it, get it, look through it, learn it, live it. The Constitution is going to forbid favoring one state over another, taxing in interstate commerce and taxing exports. We talked about that in the last unit a little bit. Congress cannot interfere with powers reserved to the states. There's going to be the checks and balances with the Supreme Court also. Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional. However, the president, he can veto bills. So we're tying in the checks and the balances here. Now, the Constitution specifically forbids Congress from the next three things I'm about to tell you about. Writ of habeas corpus, bills of attainder, and ex post facto laws. So, writ of habeas corpus. They cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus. That is going to be a court order that requires police to explain why they're holding a suspect. So, if you get arrested or something like that, they have to tell you why you're being held. If they're not, then they're not adhering to writ of habeas corpus. For the bill of attainders, they cannot pass any bills of attainder. This is going to be laws that punish a person without a jury trial. That's one of our rights that we have listed in the Bill of Rights. The third one, the ex post facto laws, they cannot pass ex post facto laws making an act a crime after the act has already been committed. So you cannot commit a crime and it be legal, and then they go and pass this law, and now you're in trouble because they just passed this law, but you already committed the crime. So guys, that's going to wrap it up right here for the congressional powers. Make sure you study. I was able to keep the video real short and to the point. I'm going to add some little animations, some words, some definitions up here for you. Make it a little bit easier. You can just copy it down, and I'm going to write down the key things that you need to write. Those main question. I think I'm pointing the right way. Those Those main questions to write on your Cornell notes, and make sure you study because we're going to have a quiz tomorrow. Okay, students, next we're going to talk about federal and state powers. Now, first let's talk about enumerated powers. Enumerated powers are powers that are specifically listed or given to the federal government. These powers are exclusive to the federal government, meaning these powers only apply to the federal government. Now, these types of powers, they're also called delegated powers. So if you hear enumerated, it could also mean delegated powers. And another name for it is also expressed powers. So if you hear enumerated, delegated, or expressed powers, know that they're all one and the same. Article 1, Section 18 is going to list 17 of those enumerated or expressed or delegated powers that Congress has. So go and pull your pocket Constitution out, take a peek at it. Now, some examples of some of the enumerated powers that only the federal government has is going to include regulate trade among states with other countries, conduct foreign affairs, raise an army, support an army, coin and print money, establish a postal system, govern U.S. territories, admit new states to the Union, regulate immigration, pass laws that are necessary and proper to carry out its powers, and give the federal government implied powers. Now, another type of power here is going to be reserved power. Reserved powers are powers that state and local governments have. It is specifically for state and local governments. So with the enumerated powers, this is specifically here written for the federal government. The reserved powers are powers that the state has. Reserved powers might include to regulate trade and commerce within their state, establish local governments, establish a public school system, conduct elections, determine qualifications of voters, provide for the public safety, health, welfare within their state. Those are all examples of reserved powers. Powers specifically reserved for states and local governments. The third type of power here we're going to talk about real quick is concurrent powers. These are powers that are shared between the federal government and state and local governments. Some of those powers might include providing for the general welfare, collecting taxes, borrowing money, establishing courts, and enforcing laws. So in a nutshell, guys, you're going to need to know the difference between these three types of powers: enumerated, reserved, and concurrent. Enumerated powers, federal government. Reserved powers, state and local. Concurrent powers, all three, well, concurrent powers is going to be sharing the power between the federal and state and local.